The discovery in the void, the silent graveyard. The Helix Nebula had drifted in cosmic silence for 40,000 years. Nothing but radiation and stellar dust moved through this forgotten sector of space, far from any inhabited worlds or trade routes. But today that eternal quiet was shattered by the deep hum of fusion drives and the excited chatter of alien voices across a dozen different communication frequencies. Admiral Cortex stood tall on the command deck of his flagship, the Dominion's Pride. His reptilian features were set in an expression of barely contained excitement as he studied the massive holographic display before him. What floated in the darkness ahead defied all expectations. 738 ships hung motionless in the void, arranged in perfect military formation. They ranged from small escort vessels to massive dreadnoughts, the largest stretching nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern. Each hull bore the scars of countless millennia in space. Pitted by micrometeorites, darkened by radiation, their surfaces telling stories of unimaginable age. "Status report," Cortex commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led the Draconian Empire's fleets for 3 decades. "All vessels are completely dead, Admiral," reported his science officer, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly as she moved. "No power signatures, no life signs, no active systems. Initial scans suggest they've been drifting here for approximately 40,000 years. Around the ancient fleet, ships from 12 different species of the Galactic Council maintained careful distance. The Vorlani had sent their finest archaeological vessel, while the gas-breathing Netherians floated in their sealed environmental craft. The insectoid Zathari buzzed with excitement in their hive ship, and the energy-based Luminos flickered between dimensions as they observed. This was the greatest archaeological discovery in galactic history, and every species wanted to claim their share of the glory. "The examination begins, Doctor." Myriax, the Council's leading xenoarchaeologist, transmitted her preliminary findings across all ships. Her 6-armed form moved gracefully as she manipulated multiple scanners simultaneously, her blue skin glowing with excitement. "Fascinating," she announced, her voice carrying to every vessel in the expedition. "The metallurgy is extremely primitive. Basic iron-nickel alloys with trace amounts of carbon. No quantum-bonded materials, no adaptive smart metals. Whoever built these ships had barely mastered basic spacefaring materials." Admiral Cortex's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Any identification of the builders?" "None yet, but the design philosophy is remarkably crude. Look at these weapon placements." She transmitted tactical overlays showing the ancient ship's armaments. "They're arranged for maximum firepower rather than efficiency. No understanding of energy dispersion principles or shield harmonics." "And the engines? By the stars, they're enormous. Clearly they had no concept of efficient propulsion." Laughter rippled across the communication channels. Commander Zilthak of the Vorlani exploration vessel was the first to voice what many were thinking. "They probably used chemical rockets," he said, his translator rendering his amusement perfectly. "Look at those massive engine housings. I bet they needed half the ship just to carry fuel. The armor plating is equally primitive," added Captain Sis of the Zathari science swarm. "Thick, heavy, inefficient. They had no understanding of deflector technology or adaptive shielding. These ships must have been slower than asteroid miners." More laughter echoed through space as the various species pointed out what they saw as obvious flaws in the ancient design. The ships were too large, too heavily armored, too crude in their construction. It was clearly the work of a species that had achieved space travel through brute force rather than elegant engineering. The human observers far behind the main group of council ships, almost forgotten in the excitement, floated a small vessel that seemed insignificant compared to the alien flagships. The UHS Endeavour was barely 200 meters long, a scout ship with a crew of 25 humans who had been invited to observe this historic discovery. Captain Sarah Chen stood quietly on her compact bridge, listening to the alien chatter through her translation system. At 38, she had spent half her life in space, but she had never seen anything like this ancient fleet. Her dark eyes were troubled as she watched the alien scientists work. "Captain," her chief engineer, Marcus Webb, said quietly. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Chen nodded slowly. Marcus was brilliant. He could look at any piece of technology and understand its principles within minutes. If he was concerned, she needed to pay attention. "Run a detailed analysis," Chen ordered, "but keep it quiet. I don't want the council to know what we're doing." Marcus's fingers moved across his control panel with practiced precision. The Endeavor's scanners weren't as powerful as the alien systems, but they were sophisticated enough for what Chen needed to know. Minutes passed in tense silence. Finally, Marcus looked up from his controls, his face pale with shock. "Captain, these ship designs, they match theoretical blueprints from our early colonial archives. The hull configurations, the weapon mounts, even the engine placement patterns. These ships were built using human design principles." Chen felt her heart skip a beat. "Are you certain?" "Positive. But Captain, if these ships are 40,000 years old, that means humans were building starships long before our recorded history shows. We even discovered fire. That's impossible." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's historian, had been listening to their conversation. She was a young woman with an insatiable curiosity about humanity's past, and her mind was already racing with possibilities. "Maybe it's not impossible," she said quietly. "Maybe our history books are incomplete." Chen stared out at the ancient fleet through her view screen. If these were really human ships, then everything they thought they knew about their species' development was wrong. Humans hadn't just recently joined the galactic community. They had been out here for 40,000 years. But where had they gone? And why was there no record of them in Earth's history? The mockery continues. While the human crew of the Endeavor wrestled with impossible implications, the alien scientists continued their examination of the ancient fleet. Their initial assessment had only reinforced their belief that they were looking at the crude work of a primitive civilization. "The computer systems are particularly amusing," transmitted Dr. Vexisthar, a cybernetic being who specialized in ancient technology. "They appear to be designed for biological neural interface, a sure sign of a species that never developed proper artificial intelligence. Probably had to use organic brains because they couldn't create adequate computing systems. The life support systems are equally primitive," added Dr. Miriax. "Atmospheric recycling, water reclamation, artificial gravity through rotation. All the hallmarks of a species that never mastered environmental manipulation. They were probably barely able to survive in space for extended periods." Admiral Corthex's communications officer, a towering insectoid creature, buzzed with amusement. "Perhaps they died out because they were too stupid to maintain their own ships. These vessels are probably floating graveyards, monuments to evolutionary failure." The alien laughter grew louder as more examples of primitive engineering were discovered. To their advanced eyes, everything about the ancient fleet spoke of a species that had achieved space travel through determination rather than intelligence. They saw the massive engines as proof of inefficiency rather than power. They interpreted the heavy armor as ignorance of proper defensive systems rather than preparation for unimaginable battles. They viewed the neural interface systems as primitive rather than recognizing them as technology more advanced than anything they currently possessed. Hidden discoveries aboard the Endeavor, Captain Chen had made a decision that would change everything. She opened a secure quantum channel to Earth and began composing a message that would reach Admiral Harrison within hours. The message was simple but carried staggering implications. "We've found something impossible. Human ships older than our recorded civilization. Request immediate analysis team and historical review. This changes everything we thought we knew about ourselves." As Chen transmitted her report, Dr. Vasquez was deep in the ship's archives, searching through every historical database they carried. What she found made the mystery even deeper. "Captain, I've been analyzing our genealogical records and comparing them to the genetic markers we're picking up from those ships," she said, her voice filled with excitement and fear. "There are matches, distant but definite. Some of these ancient humans share genetic patterns with current Earth populations." Marcus looked up from his engineering station. "That's not all. I've been analyzing the battle damage on those ships. They weren't just exploring, Captain. They were fighting. Some of these vessels show signs of weapons impacts from technology that's beyond anything we have today. Chen studied the tactical display that Marcus had compiled. The ancient ships bore scars from energy weapons that could slice through their heavy armor, kinetic impacts that had punched completely through their hulls, and something else. Burn patterns that looked like they came from weapons that manipulated space itself. "What were they fighting?" she whispered. "I don't know," Marcus replied. "But whatever it was powerful enough to damage ships that are more advanced than anything in the current galaxy." The Council's arrogance, as the human crew of the Endeavor grappled with their discoveries, the Galactic Council ships continued their work. Their confidence in their own superiority had only grown as they examined more of the ancient technology. Admiral Cortex addressed his fleet with typical Council arrogance. "This discovery will be remembered as a perfect example of how primitive species inevitably fail. These ships represent brute force engineering, quantity over quality, mass over elegance. It's exactly what we would expect from a species that achieved space travel before achieving wisdom." Dr. Miriax had been granted permission to board the largest of the ancient vessels. As she walked through its corridors with her security escort, she transmitted her observations back to the fleet. "The interior design is as crude as the exterior," she reported. "Massive corridors, inefficient use of space, primitive lighting systems. These beings clearly never learned proper architectural principles for space habitation." What she didn't recognize was that the corridors were built to accommodate rapid movement during combat, that the inefficient spaces were designed for damage control teams to work quickly, and that the primitive lighting was actually a sophisticated system that could operate in multiple spectrums depending on the species using it. The aliens' preconceptions blinded them to the truth. They saw what they expected to see: primitive engineering from a failed civilization. They never considered that they might be looking at technology so advanced that it appeared simple to their limited understanding. The Quiet Watcher's captain. Chen made another decision that would prove crucial in the hours to come. She activated the Endeavor's passive listening systems and began recording everything the Council ships were transmitting. If these were truly human ships, then humanity had a right to know what was being discovered. But as she listened to the alien scientist mock and dismiss the ancient technology, she felt a growing sense of unease. These beings were treating humanity's possible legacy as a joke, a curiosity to be catalogued and forgotten. "Dr. Vasquez," she said quietly, "if these ships are human, where are their builders? 40,000 years is a long time, but it's not impossible that some descendants might still be out there." Elena looked up from her research with troubled eyes. "That's what worries me, Captain. If ancient humans built this fleet and then disappeared, what happened to them? Did they die out naturally? Were they destroyed by whatever they were fighting? Or what? Or maybe they didn't disappear at all. Maybe they're still out there watching us right now." As if summoned by her words, the Endeavor's sensors began detecting something that made everyone on the bridge freeze in terror. Deep, within the ancient fleet, where no power had been detected for 40,000 years, something was beginning to stir. Systems that had been dark and silent were starting to show the faintest energy signatures. It was barely detectable, so subtle that the alien ships with their focus on external scans would never notice it. But the ancient fleet was not as dead as everyone believed. It was simply waiting for the right moment to wake up. The awakening of Titan's the fatal mistake. The accident that changed everything happened on the 5th day of the expedition. Technician Vorthak of the Draconian science team was working deep inside the ancient flagship, attempting to remove what his instruments identified as a primitive power coupling. He had been making jokes with his team about the crude engineering, when his plasma cutter slipped and struck a crystalline panel he hadn't noticed before. The crystal flared with brilliant light, and Vorthak jumped back in alarm. But instead of causing damage, his accidental strike seemed to complete some kind of circuit that had been waiting 40 millennia to be closed. Blue energy raced along lines in the walls that none of them had seen before. What they had dismissed as decorative patterns were actually power conduits of incredible sophistication. Throughout the massive ship, systems that had slumbered in the deep cold of space began to wake up. Computer cores that had been dark and silent started humming with life. Display screens flickered and came online, and deep in the ship's heart, something far more significant began to stir. "What did you do?" his partner asked nervously as the corridor filled with an ethereal blue glow. "Nothing. I just struck this crystal by accident," Vorthak replied, but his voice carried an edge of fear. Around them, the ancient ship was transforming from a dead hulk into something alive and aware. The Fleet Awakens Admiral Corthex was in his ready room when the first alarms began sounding throughout his flagship. He rushed to the bridge where his crew was staring at their displays in shock. "Report," he commanded. "Admiral, the ancient fleet is powering up," his sensor operator announced, her crystalline form ringing with harmonics of fear. "Energy readings are climbing exponentially across all 700 ships." Through the main view screen, Corthex could see the transformation taking place. The ancient vessels were no longer dark and lifeless. Lights were coming on throughout their hulls, and he could see the blue glow of engines beginning to warm up after 40,000 years of dormancy. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Technician Vorthak's team," the communications officer reported. "They're requesting immediate evacuation from the flagship." But it was already too late. Throughout the ancient fleet, automated systems had completed their startup sequence and were beginning to analyze their situation. Sensors that had been dormant for millennia swept across the surrounding space, cataloging every ship, every weapon, every potential threat. The Guardian speaks, the voice that suddenly filled every communication channel in the expedition, was unlike anything any of them had ever heard. It spoke in perfect galactic standard but with an archaic accent that spoke of incredible age. "Unknown vessels, you have entered a restricted military zone and are conducting unauthorized activities. Identify yourselves immediately." Admiral Corthex felt his scales rise in alarm. The voice carried an authority that made his own military bearing seem like childish posturing. "This is Admiral Corthex of the Galactic Council Exploration Fleet," he responded, trying to maintain his composure. "We are conducting a scientific examination of these derelict vessels under Council authorization." "Council authorization is not recognized," the ancient voice replied coldly. "These vessels are property of the Terran Colonial Defense Fleet. Your presence here is unauthorized. Withdraw immediately or face defensive action." Dr. Miriax, still aboard the ancient flagship, transmitted urgently. "Admiral, the ship's systems are fully active now. I'm detecting weapon signatures that don't match anything in our databases. We need to evacuate immediately." But the ancient systems were already 3 steps ahead of them. The holographic displays throughout the flagship were now showing detailed tactical information about every council ship. Their weapons, their shields, their crew numbers, and most disturbing of all, their weaknesses. The analysis far from the growing tension, Captain Chen aboard the Endeavour was watching the situation unfold with a mixture of fascination and terror. Her ship's passive sensors were recording everything, including transmissions that the ancient fleet was making on frequencies the council ships couldn't detect. "Marcus, are you getting this?" she asked her chief engineer. "Yes, Captain. The ancient fleet is using quantum entanglement communications. They're talking to each other faster than light. And Captain, they're not just talking to the ships here. They're connecting to something else, something vast." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her historical analysis. "Captain, that voice mentioned the Terran Colonial Defense Fleet. I've been searching our archives, and I found references to something called the Exodus Project in some of our oldest records. It was supposedly a classified program from Earth's early space age, but all the details were lost." Chen felt pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to fall into place. "Terran means Earth, doesn't it?" "Yes, Captain. It's an ancient term for anything related to Earth or its colonies." Before Chen could respond, her communications officer suddenly straightened in alarm. "Captain, we're being scanned. The ancient fleet is analyzing our ship." On the main screen, Chen could see one of the ancient vessels had turned its attention to the small human scout ship. But unlike the hostile scans directed at the council ships, this felt different, more curious than threatening. The recognition The Guardian's artificial intelligence had been processing data for the past several minutes, analyzing everything from genetic markers to linguistic patterns. When it finally spoke again, its tone had changed dramatically. Scanning complete. Genetic markers indicate Terran origin. Language patterns confirm Sol 3 heritage. Identity confirmed. You are the children of Earth. Captain Chen felt her heart race. She opened a communication channel, her voice trembling with the weight of history. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Human Systems vessel Endeavour. Are you saying these ships are human? Affirmative, Captain Chen. I am the Guardian, commanding intelligence of the Terran Colonial Defense Fleet. I have maintained this fleet for 40,000 years, waiting for the children of Earth to return to their rightful place among the stars. The implications hit everyone aboard the Endeavour like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been newcomers to space. They had been out here for 40 millennia. But somehow that knowledge had been lost to Earth's history. Admiral Cortex's voice cut through the moment. Impossible. Humans are a primitive species that only achieved space travel 500 years ago. They are the youngest members of the Galactic Council. The Guardian's response carried a note of what could only be described as amusement. Admiral Cortex of the Draconian Empire, your species achieved space travel approximately 12,000 years ago. Humans were already establishing colonies beyond the galactic rim when your people were still learning to use fire. The history lesson, what followed, was the most shocking revelation in galactic history. The Guardian began to explain humanity's true heritage, speaking directly to Captain Chen while the Council ships listened in stunned silence. 43,000 years ago, Earth faced a crisis that threatened all life on the planet. Not a natural disaster, but something far worse. The first incursion of entities from beyond our reality. Earth's governments launched the Exodus Project, sending colony fleets to establish humanity throughout the galaxy while the homeworld recovered. Chen found her voice. What happened to Earth? The planet survived, but the knowledge of the colonies was deliberately erased from historical records. Your people chose to start fresh, to rebuild without the burden of ancient conflicts. We were ordered to maintain our vigil until Earth was ready to reclaim its galactic heritage. Dr. Vasquez was frantically taking notes. Guardian, what about the other colonies? Are there more human settlements out there? 743 colonial worlds were established during the Great Exodus. Most have evolved beyond recognition after 40 millennia. Some transcended physical existence entirely. Others chose to remain hidden, watching and waiting. The demonstration Admiral Cortex, his pride wounded by these revelations, made a decision that would prove to be catastrophic. Unable to accept that his primitive humans could possess such advanced technology, he ordered his weapons to be charged as a show of force. I don't believe any of this, he declared. These ships are ancient relics, and I won't be intimidated by malfunctioning artificial intelligence. The moment his weapon systems powered up, every ancient ship in the fleet responded instantly. The display of force that followed would be remembered as the most one-sided demonstration in galactic history. Weapons that the Council had dismissed as primitive revealed their true nature. Energy beams that could slice through modern shields like tissue paper. Kinetic weapons that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Defensive systems that seemed to bend space itself around the ancient hulls. Within seconds, every Council ship was disabled. Their weapons were offline, their engines dead, their shields collapsed. They floated helplessly in space while the ancient fleet held them at gunpoint with weapons that were beyond their comprehension. Only the Endeavour remained untouched, protected by its human crew from the Guardian's defensive protocols. The truth about the galaxy. With the Council fleet neutralized, the Guardian began to reveal truths about the galaxy that changed everything the various species thought they knew about their own history. The entities that originally threatened Earth 40,000 years ago were not destroyed, the Guardian explained. They were merely pushed back beyond the galactic rim, into the void between galaxies. For 40 millennia, the Terran Colonial Defense Fleet has maintained a watch, keeping them from returning. Captain Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying there are still threats out there? Affirmative. My deep space sensors have detected movement in the void. The Devourers are stirring again. The time of the second incursion approaches. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been early space travelers. They had been the galaxy's protectors for 40,000 years. While the Council species had evolved and built their civilizations, ancient human fleets had been standing guard against threats from beyond reality itself. The technology you observe in this fleet was not developed for exploration or trade, the Guardian continued. It was forged in wars against entities that exist outside normal spacetime. Every system, every weapon, every defensive measure was designed to fight beings that your current understanding cannot comprehend. The new reality, Admiral Cortex, his flagship powerless and drifting, could only listen as his entire worldview crumbled around him. The primitive humans his people had patronized were actually the descendants of the galaxy's ancient guardians. The crude technology his scientists had mocked was more advanced than anything the Council had ever achieved. Dr. Myriax, still, aboard the ancient flagship, found herself face-to-face with holographic displays showing the true scope of humanity's legacy. Star charts that mapped not just the known galaxy, but the vast networks of human colonies that existed beyond Council space. Tactical assessments of threats that the Council had never even imagined. Archives containing 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. Guardian, Captain Chen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why reveal all this now? Why wake up after so long? Because the time has come for humanity to reclaim its role as the galaxy's protectors. The Devourers grow stronger with each passing millennium. The colonial defense fleet, though mighty, is not infinite. We need the resources and populations of modern human worlds to face what is coming. The Guardian's holographic form solidified, showing the face of a man who carried the weight of ages in his eyes. Captain Chen, I am transmitting coordinates to 743 worlds where the children of Earth have built new civilizations. It is time for humanity to remember its true heritage and prepare for the greatest battle in galactic history. As the ancient fleet began to power up for the first time in 40,000 years, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The age of human obscurity was over. The descendants of Earth were about to reclaim their place as the protectors of all life in the galaxy. And in the vast darkness between galaxies, ancient enemies stirred in response, sensing that their greatest foes had finally awakened from their long slumber. The second incursion was coming, and this time humanity would be ready.